High employee turnover has long been a problem in the service industry here in Taiwan and globally, with new hires often leaving soon after walking in through the front door. But new data suggests that one change could make a difference: personality assessments. Companies that use them during recruitment see higher retention across the board. So, what is the power of personality tests? And do they really benefit workers and employers? I'm Tomasz Koper, and this is Connected on TaiwanPlus. To evaluate my personality and see if I'm a good fit for this job, we welcome from Sheffield, UK, Laura Dean, chartered occupational psychologist and senior university teacher in work psychology at Sheffield University. And from Taipei, Will Lin, director at Page Taiwan. First of all, thank you both for being on the show. Laura, I want to start with you here. Now, personality tests are reportedly being used more and more in recruitment processes, starting from entry-level jobs all the way to C-suite. But these tests also give very different results. Some give personality types, some give personality traits. How should we approach, how should we see and use these results and really understand what exactly are they measuring?
So it's quite common to use type tests within business, but it's not something as a psychologist that I would endorse. Essentially, type tests where you're sort of put in a box and you're a neat box, they're good or they're helpful because they're fast to use. And if somebody's sort of wanting to reflect on their career and what they might want to do, that might be helpful for them. But in terms of hiring purposes, we really want trait tests. So good personality tests are, evidence-based, reliable, they're validated. And what they do is they tell you how you are likely to behave, not who you are, but how you're likely to behave in a given situation based on some trait tendency that you have. So when you're using them for selection purposes, we really want those strong workplace tools that, have well-established trait characteristics, not the type. Essentially, if a test putting you in a neat box, it's probably not measuring personality accurately.
Well, Will, based on your experience in the field of recruitment, do you feel that personality tests are a useful tool for a recruiter?
Honestly, for sure, yeah, it is. It is for sure useful. I would say around 30 to 40% in Taiwan's business either is a domestic company or is a multinational company here. They use this tool to two things. One is making the final decision on hiring a talent. I think the second thing is to spot out the opportunity that if they miss to explore a part of the interviewees or candidate's background or personality, so they can leverage the result of the test to do further round of the interview. I would share experience that one time one of the IT manufacturing, a joint one in Taiwan, they have 4-round interview. First round with HR, second one with line manager, and the final round, the third round with VP and the founder in final. All interviewers got really positive feedback on the candidate, and then after that, they need to do a corporate personality or traits assessment test, and the score wasn't really good. It's around 22 or 23% out of 100%, and there's not right or wrong. It's more like a personality or a chemistry fit between employees and employers. The point is that based on what we would do is we may fail this candidate, right? But in final, what they did in this case is that they spot out the area they further like to test, like to interview more on this candidate. And then they're holding another round panel interview because a score of cross-department collaboration is relatively low. And then they invite other department head to speak to the candidate again. And it turns out it's quite good. The chemistry between all the senior leaders and the candidate is quite good. And still, they decide to hire the candidate in final. So I would say it's not just a screening tool, but also a opportunity for us to review a candidate deeply before they make the final decision.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned some numbers, and we will dig into all of the other things that you mentioned there. But let's take a look at what the numbers are like in Taiwan and how companies here are using these kind of assessments. According to 104 Job Bank, one of Taiwan's largest online recruitment platforms, nearly 19% of companies in Taiwan use personality tests in the hiring process, while 22% use competency-based assessments. Personality tests seem to be the most popular in the IT industry at almost 30%. General and knowledge-intensive service industries follow at around 20%, while only around 13% of manufacturing enterprises use personality tests. Now, the survey was conducted on a sample of 1,100 HR professionals. So, Will, you work with a lot of companies here in Taiwan that use similar tests, or some of them do. How much do companies actually care about these results? You brought up one example of that being more of an informative tool rather than a decision-making tool. Is that always the case here, though?
Well, the data, the number I mentioned is a bit higher. I mentioned like 30 to 40%. I think it's because most of my business and the partner is we working in a middle to senior level recruitment. We are not hiring entry level. So when we hire senior people in the market, it shows the more importance on the soft skill, the collaboration across departments, the decision-making skill, and the traits, the chemistries. So that's why I believe there's a difference between the data in senior or like see the data in the whole picture. And yes, I think it's quite crucial that this can support us to make a decision, because when we're hiring, let's say director or senior level or say C-suite level, sometimes we just need something to push us to make the decision.
Laura, there are a lot of personality tests out there, and most of us who aren't recruiters think of a few well-known types like Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, DISC, Hogan, and then there's the Big Five. Now, you are the president-elect of the British Psychological Society, which is a UK body that accredits tests. So from your point of view, do any of those stand out, both in positive and negative light, specifically for the recruitment process?
Yeah, for the recruitment process, we really want to be using tests that are based on traits, not on types. So tests like, NEO, Hogan, OPQ, these type of tests are really measuring multiple aspects of personality, and they're doing so in a continuous way. So rather than saying you are introvert or extrovert, as the MBTI might say, they would look at different aspects of introversion and extroversion and how they might play out in the workplace, and put you on a scale of more or less likely to behave in a particular way in relation to the general population or relation to a particular group. It's really important that you're using a test that compares to the group that you're interested in working with, or the organization you're interested in working with, because essentially the trait doesn't change, but the expression of the trait changes based on cultural factors. So there might be a trait such as introversion or extroversion. We're all on a scale from introvert to extrovert, somewhere along there. But cultural aspects will influence how much you behave in an extrovert or an introvert way in the workplace. So, for example, in East Asia, we see that being more introverted is often seen as more beneficial for the organization in terms of been much more value on things like people working well together, on relationships, on trust, whereas in the West we value extroversion much more. So you'll find that people tend to report themselves as being more extrovert in the West and more introvert in the East. And so what we need to do is compare our candidates against the right profile for the area that they're going to be working on. Because if you get somebody from, say, Italy that highly values extroversion and you compare them to people from Taiwan, they'll show up as massively extrovert. Even if against their own population, they might show up more towards the middle or the introvert side of the scale. So yeah, choosing a test that uses a continuous measure and compares against the right population that you're wanting the individual to work in is really important.
Well, Will, you said that you work mainly with higher level employees and higher level candidates, not with entry level. I'm curious, what would be different about a personality test that a C-suite candidate, someone who is gunning for a CEO position, would take compared to a test that we could find online, or maybe a standard test that an entry level candidate would have to take?
Yeah, this is a quite good one. That I think echo to what just Laura shares. I would say traits is one thing we definitely employers, companies definitely want to review. Or on the other hand, they also really care about capability test. So in Page, ourselves, we also use caliber test, and Hogan, a lot of companies use it. Last thing, MBTI, like Laura mentions, and the most different between I would say senior experts and junior people when we talk about the personality test, I think it's about the qualitative. When we doing a personality test review or a capability test review, normally with C-suite, we would do 360. It's a really deep review from all the capability. For example, if we are hiring a C-suite level, like you mentioned, CEO, we need to evaluate his or her potential and capability on, public speaking, decision making, and also other stuff like cross department collaboration, things like that. And at the same time, we will also do, compare with optional selection, like we take the box for junior people to do the trait assessment. Sometimes we do one-on-one review for this, so we can provide a long list of the strength to provide to the employee before they making the final decision.
Well, we've been focusing on Taiwan quite a bit so far. So let's take a look at what the situation is like elsewhere. According to a survey published by Fortune magazine, 80% of Fortune 500 companies use personality tests in their hiring process. Across the UK and the US, 71% of employers say testing is more predictive of on-the-job success than resumes. And 65% say workers hired through skills tests stay in their roles longer than those who weren't tested. Laura, this survey suggests that a lot more enterprises in the UK and the US are using personality tests and personality assessments compared to what we see in Asia, or specifically, in Taiwan. What do you think is behind that difference in adoption?
Yeah, I mean, there are differences in sort of culture in terms of how the different areas value relationships and sort of task focus. So in the West, we have a big focus on task achievement, and that's what's most important. In Taiwan, there's much more about personal relationships, making sure you fit well in a team. And so there's much more about that sort of looking for personal chemistry through the recruitment process. In the UK and more so in the US, we're more sort of litigious. And so employers want to have sort of defensible, standardized processes. They want to be able to show that they've used a test that actually measures rather than one person's opinion of somebody else's personality there. And also we have much bigger applicant pools. And I think that perhaps influences the use of tests, because there are some organizations that use the personality test right at the very start. So you can't even get hold of the job application form until you've completed a personality measure to make sure you map onto the style of that organization. And that's important because that helps the applicant as well recognize whether the organization is going to be the right fit for them. Because if they have a particular style of working, a preference for working in a particular way, and that doesn't match the organization, they're unlikely to be happy there. So, they can opt to not continue with that application at that point rather than be ruled out by the employer later on. It's not to say that somebody with a particular personality profile that doesn't map onto the employer couldn't be successful there. It just means that they're unlikely to be happy there, and that is likely to lead to turnover. So mapping onto personality at an early stage means that we're probably going to end up with people staying much longer, and the research shows that people stay longer when they match their personality profiles with the organization.
Well, Will, there is one aspect of assessing a candidate's personality that is maybe unique to Taiwan, and I'm talking about looking at zodiac signs and also sometimes even bringing in fortune tellers, which reportedly happens at some companies. Is that a common thing, and what does it say about the sort of cultural dimension of the entire process?
Well, it's definitely not a common thing, but I would say during my career, I would say less than 5% of the employer will, leverage zodiac fortune telling to making the final call, to make everyone to understand how it's like. I remember there's one automotive parts provider from Taiwan and selling parts to U.S. market. In the beginning of understanding what they want to recruit, they specifically mentioned that I don't want to hire someone with water sign. I just want someone rather than water sign. So honestly, in my first glance, is that what's wrong with them? But I can understand and respect that is because this way to making a decision hire the talent based on the sign is because that's how they run their successful business. They tend to work with clients, vendors with sizing fire, so the chemistry is good, and then the foundation of business is set up in this way. And internal communication, the founder may have more conflicts with people in water signs. So I think all this process is not a sudden decision. It's more like gathered and accumulated based on the founder's experience. So yeah, we understand that, and it's not common, but it happens sometimes.
Well, let's bring it back to more scientific grounds. Intuitively, a lot of these tests or a recruitment process that is based on testing feels or may feel to many people as fair because everyone has to take the test, but not everyone is the same. So, Laura, what does evidence tell us about how these tests performs when it comes to bias and inclusivity?
Yeah, so the tests only work if you're doing accurate evaluation of the job and the organization. There is a real risk that we recruit people like ourselves. We have that general bias, and we need to make sure that we're not saying, well, there's only one way to do a job, so we need to select for this personality type because that's the personality type of the people are already in that role. So an example would be, we might think, well, to recruit a salesperson, our existing salespeople are high on persuasion. They drive for results. And so we would look for that in a personality measure. However, there is a completely different way of doing sales, and that is the very low key building relationships. And one style you sell, and you sell very effectively the first time, but you don't sell again. The second style, you might not sell the first time, but you build a relationship and you sell over a long period of time. Now, they're both effective ways of selling, and we might want people at either end of that spectrum for that, but we probably don't want people in the middle. So we need to be really careful when we're mapping the personality profile, that we're thinking about all the different ways in which a job can be done, and not just sort of think of stereotypes of what good employees look like. We also need to be mindful that candidates might do what's called faking good. So they might recognize what the ideal candidate looks like in the organization. They might pretend that their personality type is like that. Good personality tests have in what called social desirability scales. So they're really looking for that sort of discrepancy in there. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't hire somebody just because they faked that personality, because if they faked it in that process, then maybe they really want that job, and it's up to them whether they're going to be happy there. They're making the decision to apply for an organisation that isn't really matching them. So we need to think about the extent to which we sort of paternalistically say, no, we're not going to have you because we think that you're, pretending to be this personality. If they know what it is they're going to be asked to actually do and how they're being asked to behave in the workplace.
To what degree do these tests account for things like neurodivergence? People just kind of thinking in different ways, not necessarily better or worse.
So you'll find that certain neurodiverse profiles might look in a particular way. And what we need to be mindful of, again, in the recruitment process is they might have a preference behaving in a particular way. And if you've chosen if you said, an ideal candidate for this role has this type of personality, you're not accounting for the different ways in which people might do that role. So somebody might do the role by being highly communicative, working in teams, involving other people. Somebody perhaps who's autistic might prefer to do a task mostly by themselves, and they might be able to do the task very well like that, and it works effectively for them. But they're not mapping onto what you've recognized as that ideal candidate. So again, a lot of it comes back down to that, making sure you've done your job analysis well and checked that how can we do this job? What are the different ways? What are the different personality types that could do this job, rather than just saying this is how it's done at the moment.